As you may recall, the circumstances of how I became nightly anchor were things happened very rapidly, and suddenly I found myself in this position. And I think it was kind of a delayed reaction to understand kind of the importance that people have always held these, three, evening news anchor positions at a pretty high place. And I was still going through this, like, you sure you got the right guy? This wasn't a mistake. So there was a lot of adjustment. But then in further reflection and people asking me about it, I thought, that's a big deal. I think I'm hoping
Max Robinson and Carol Simpson came close, but
right.
Then you broke through.
And I always tell people it's not like there was a African Americans need not apply sign,
right.
But there were only 3 of those jobs,
right.
And I didn't really think the opportunity would come my way just because of timing and age and those sorts of things.
Yes.
But I always remember the story my mother liked to tell, which is I think I might have been 4 or 5 years old, and I asked her why there were no colored people on TV, and she remembered that. And then you fast forward, and I'm struck then, about the history and the impact. And I've always said that, people should be able to turn on TV and see someone that looks kind of like themselves or somebody they know.
Right.
And I'm hoping we'll get to a point where we don't have to make a big deal about firsts anymore.
Exactly.
That it'll just be something that'll be very natural. This next generation will grow up, and they'll see people of all walks of life in different places. To be honest, Chicago was challenging at first. I don't know if you recall the circumstances, but
no.
WBBM was the target of a boycott by Operation Push over the demotion of Harry Porterfield.
That's right.
And there were a lot of demands, including a black anchor. And my good friend Jonathan Rogers knew me in New York. I was anchoring weekends there and tapped me for the job. I was 27. And I didn't quite know what I was walking into, and there was that kind of adjustment of, wait a minute, why am I here, and how does the audience perceive me? How does the white audience perceive me? But Chicago embraced me, and I embraced Chicago back, and I learned a lot about television journalism. A lot of what I learned here about, anchors who report, who are leaders in the newsroom, is what has formed who I am today.
One significant story you covered in Chicago?
I covered a story about hospital bypasses, and it was a story of a child that had died because the ambulance was turned away at the closest hospital and had to go to one farther away. And there was an issue at the time of how this was decided and how often this was happening. So I remember that, talking to the family and understanding the impact of those sorts of decisions.
And 2 last questions. What is one of your most memorable assignments when you look back over your career?
Oh my goodness. That's memorable. The Olympics in general. I've covered 8 Olympics, so they're all memorable, for each location. But I consider it one of the perks of the job because it's a story. It's largely a happy story. I mean, there's sometimes controversies, but it's young people who, for 2 weeks, will become household names. There are rock stars. We forget their names sometimes, afterwards.
Right.
And I'm fortunate to work at the network that carries the Olympics, and so that's not one story, but it's the one I look forward to most.
Great. Last question. When you look at the issue of race in America, as a biracial individual and with a biracial household, you took over the anchor position at a time when race was blowing up in this country. We had just had the church massacre. We had just had President Obama speaking to the black male experience and using the N-word, trying to impress on America what that was about. When you think about the issue of race in America and you see against the backdrop of President Trump and the whole otherizing of America, what are your thoughts about where we are going or where we need to be in terms of a multicultural or accepting society? Well,
I mean, the legacy of America is still fresh and young, and I think sometimes we forget that this is a long journey. I mean, being an African American anchor or an African American president, those are important milestones along the way. But some of these things are deeply ingrained. We go through periods where people are more vocal about their racial feelings, which makes you think that they've been there all along, and different things bring them out. I think I think it's a tough nut to crack. I think sometimes we forget that. I think we think that everything's going great, and I don't think sometimes we accept the fact that this is really, really, really hard, and nobody has a single answer. But I do think that, you know, each generation will crack that door open a little wider, where we actually, I don't think we'll ever be colorblind, but maybe, you know, less conscious of color and who we are. I'm a glass half full person. I always believe that, you know, we always find our compass. I can go get giddy about this country and its possibilities, but you know, I feel confident we'll find our way.
That's it. But I should have asked you your advice to aspiring journalists, the young coming into this business.
I have a lot of advice for young coming into this business, but I tell them, first of all, don't be discouraged by the criticism. Understand that what we do is not to be liked. We're there to challenge people, to present different points of view, to, you know, hit people in places that really make them have to think things that they may have held, you know, true for a long time. And that's exciting in its own way.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay.